All right, welcome once again to MCC Campus Connections. We are recording from our downtown location at LaSalle, 203 North LaSalle. And you can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts. You can contact us at podcast@mcccollege.edu. We look forward to hearing from you. And today we're going to do things a little bit different today. So we have with us Shaudy Martinez, who's going to be our co-host for today. Welcome, Shaudy. How are you?
All good. Super excited again.
Yeah, you were a previous guest on one of our episodes, so you obviously liked it and wanted to come back and do it again.
Yes, definitely.
Wonderful. And we have Ryan Mutter, who is our international admissions manager. And you're fairly new to MCC, correct?
Yeah, as of last November. So
last November has been that long already?
Oh, yes.
It's like with the new year, it just goes by really fast.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, since last year. Wonderful. Yeah. So first of all, I'm excited to have both of you. So we're going to do a little bit, things. This podcast will be a little bit different because we have 3 people instead of just 2.
Mm-hmm.
From the international.
I know.
Yeah, from the international team.
Uh-huh.
So we'll get started getting to know Ryan a little bit more since you're our latest addition, and you're not from the Midwest, which is I always find that fascinating.
Yeah.
When I speak to people that are not from the Midwest. So you're from
South Dakota.
South Dakota.
Yeah.
North
Originally,
Dakota.
I'm not from like Chicago. So like for us, it's like that, the other Midwest, right? So yeah, originally from South Dakota, from a small town called Avon. I always call it the village because there's probably about 500 or so people.
Nice.
Most people live in the countryside. Of course, there's the actual town center itself. But yeah, and I was there for at least good 19, 20 years of my life.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's a small community, rural farm community. Your school is basically kindergarten, preschool, all the way to senior year. So that's basically my educational background for my early youth.
Right? Wow. Do you still have connections with the people you went to school with?
I mean, like a few people I still talk to or know of, or I at least know of them, rather it be like through word of mouth, social media, Facebook, of course, right? But even like when you go back, I haven't been home for a while, but like I know if I go back there, people probably know me versus if I don't remember them, just because since it's such a small community, very close knit, most people know you by your last name. They probably know your parents or like people in your family background. It's like one of those situations where everyone knows each other. So yeah, it's a very like familiar place.
Do you find that people who live in small towns stay in small towns?
Usually,
for the most part?
Yeah. So like I know in the past, like think of my parents' age, it was more common to stay in the small town or stay in the state. But I know like in my experience, most people, like for example, my class, majority have stayed in the state because that's just a trend. If people don't stay in the small town, they go to like the larger city like Sioux Falls, maybe Rapid City for school, work, employment opportunities. That is a trend, right? But looking back, I think back home in like the Avon, it's more of there's still people there, but I think most people nowadays, once they finish high school, they do tend to move. Or if they stay, they might stay for like family farms, agricultural. Maybe they have a connection. So yeah.
I was about to ask the same thing because my reference are the movies, and we always see that people from small towns, they always dream to get out of there.
That kind of was, that was a dream at one point. But like, again, it's not the common dream of most people. Like even in my senior year, I mean, it's very common for people to go to either one of the 2 state colleges. Either they go to USD, University of South Dakota, or they go to SCSU, South Dakota State University, where I went, right? If they don't go to those 2 state colleges, they'll go to maybe a specialty college, or they might go out of state. But it's like at least a good 90% probably stay in state.
And how do you get out of there?
It depends on you. I mean, people I know that maybe went out of state probably had a scholarship. Some neighboring states like Minnesota usually have a deal with us, so we're considered in-state tuition. I almost went to University of Minneapolis or Minnesota.
Okay.
They had an offer or a deal. There was a place in like Marshall, Minnesota, Southwest Minnesota University. They also do in-state tuition. So that would be one opportunity. And if someone didn't do that, I mean, it's a different situation. Maybe they did something else, or they had something else they could use to go out of state. But generally, it's like in-state only. But
so your transition from Avon, which is a smaller town, to when you went to university, what was that transition like?
So I always like make the reference. I kept going up and up and up and up, right? So SDSU is Brookings, South Dakota. It's more of a, to me, it's still more like a farm town, but since it has that university, it's more of a college town, right? The population goes from like 500, like I had in Avon, to about maybe 16,000 because of the university. So it is like a small adjustment. And I always think at first when I go to a bigger place or bigger city or new city, it feels like it's bigger, but after a while, it seems like it's still a small town to me, right? Like the last time I was in Brookings, I can still remember the streets. It doesn't feel like it's that big. Of course, if you go off like college course season or whatever, it's less people because most people leave. So it goes from like 16,000 to like what, maybe 8,000 when school's not in session. Or like the summer break. Yeah.
Those numbers for me are like, what?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a big thing. Like, I remember always in like summer or like in August when school starts up, like there's this group of people just coming and you can't really go shopping anywhere because it's so busy. There's so many people coming in. People are moving. A very common Midwestern thing is like when your child is going to university, you take them to university, you help them move. It's like a family thing, right? Always someone's crying because like it's the first time. Yeah.
It's your first time, but it's the last time.
Yeah, but for those 3 days, it's always busy, right? Even when I worked for international students, maybe my second or third year, I would help international students at my university kind of, hey, welcome to your new school, welcome to a new cultural setting.
Part of the orientation.
Exactly. So yeah, and then we would do pre-orientation, helping them adjust because it's not going to be very similar, or maybe what they knew in movies is a little bit different because I can't really think of an accurate movie or series that depicts my home other than like Western romance movies, which aren't even accurate because I mean, that's a long time ago.
Movies.
Yeah,
Hallmark.
like Wild Bill.
But for international students, it's different because probably they don't have their parents here.
Exactly.
So they are alone. So things that if you help them, it's good to have that orientation at that time because it's totally new country, new college, new everything.
Yeah, and that's like always having to have these like small communities of international friends. So like I've been in some groups here and there, like help people find a group so they can connect with someone, especially like think about the holidays, right?
Oh,
most people leave or they can't.
They're the hardest ones.
Or like, you know, holidays and maybe things you celebrated back home or in your culture. Like that's something I always try to like help get people involved or like find that connection. Right. And that's where a lot of my friends kind of came from in that background too. So it gave me more of that cultural insight because like back home when I was growing up in the village, I mean, it's not very diverse. Like, yeah, we have TV, we have the internet, but like you don't actually experience multicultural things until you actually get involved or meet people. Right.
I think, I don't know if you have the same experience, but when I was in Venezuela, I didn't have any contact with international people at all. So I was in my town, in my city, in my car. I mean, all my friends were from my neighborhood. So
like
once I leave the country, I really start to understand and learn and connect and appreciate the differences and similarities. But I didn't have any contact with international people.
Well, even like in my homeschool, like in my Avon, I mean, we'd get occasionally like one international student, but I always kind of felt kind of strange for them because like, okay, you came from Norway, you came from Spain, you came from Korea to like this small farm town, probably had no idea what you're getting into because they probably went through like some sort of like an agency or a company, and then they just send them like, welcome. But no, most of them had fun. I mean, like, I don't know of any that had a bad experience, but I think it's a very different experience than you would maybe have thought of when you started.
Yep.
So
is college a little bit more, or the university was that a little bit more diverse, or was it still mainly people from South Dakota or South Dakota, North Dakota?
SDSU was more diverse because, of course, you have like your typical like Midwestern South Dakotans here, but then you also have like an international community because the university kind of specializes in agricultural studies, nursing studies. So some of my international friends were probably more in agricultural, or they're doing maybe a STEM kind of college situation. I had a friend in Colombia, and she studied bees, which is really interesting because I didn't know we had an actual like department for that. And like, think of the Smithsonian, like they have all those like specimen samples of bees, and that wasn't in my university, so I got to see that. That's cool. I had a friend from both Mexico and Bolivia. They did a lot of agricultural stuff. So they're doing like testing different kind of seeds and planting, which again, agricultural state is what we use for that. So yeah, it was a nice like opportunity to learn more of the international side, or like it's more diverse than just what I had at home. So
what was it that you originally wanted to study once you got to the university?
So I'm one of those classic, you know, I changed my major a few times.
Tell me more.
And so it's like students are like, what? Anyways, initially when I entered SDSU, I was biology major because in high school, I mean, I did well in biology. I liked it. I understood the material. I'm like, okay, this could be an opportunity. So my first year I did biology, which was okay, right? But I knew about my second semester of my freshman year and like, hey, a little bit different than what I had in my school for education because the chemistry and the physics are more advanced, not doing as well. So at some point I kind of had to make a decision that was more like, okay, you know, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I'm not doing too well. In my university, they kind of have your first year, you have like a buddy system of some sort. I don't remember the name of it, but they kind of help you when it comes to, okay, you're not maybe academically performing well in certain classes. Here's some study groups. Here's what you can do, which, you know, I took advantage. But at some point, it's like, okay, this is not going to work for me because I'm not doing as well as I did, which is culture shock in my sense. Like, okay, education from home was very focused on test taking because that was the trend at the time. To go to university and understand like, okay, what you study and learn here is not test taking. It changes your whole perspective. So basically, I know my following semester, I took a semester off because they give you the option to like, okay, you can take a break and come back next semester, which I did. And so after that, came back. I believe I chose park management because my state's known for, you know, natural parks, state parks, et cetera. I worked at a state park briefly as well during the break.
Okay.
Switched my major to park management, and then that following, to us, it's spring semester, despite it's winter, there were some budget cuts, so that program was then canceled. So next option is like, okay, well, I mean, I'm already going to start semester. I switched to undecided, which undecided is basically you do your general requirements. You take a class to kind of discover yourself, right? Which at first it sounded kind of silly to take a class like that and pay college credit for that. But it's the same class that helped me realize, okay, you know, you do well at teaching, you do well at languages, you have opportunities, there's something you explore, which I did. And that's where I changed to like more international studies, right? And then eventually when I started that for the following semester, I decided to do more languages since I had more backgrounds in that. We have an opportunity to take a placement test, which is very familiar around most schools. When you take a language course, you take a placement to see where you're at. I had taken German prior. I didn't really feel like I would continue with German because, again, at that time, I mean,
it's a hard one.
It is. And also, like, Spanish is more common and more practical, right? I had taken 2 years in high school. So when I decided, let's try Spanish, took a placement test, and I got basically intermediate, which is about a B1, B2.
Good.
And the other nice like convenience of that was at my university, there's a deal where you can basically buy the credits for all the lower levels to fast track your degree, which is convenient because at that time, I don't want to stay longer because it can be more expensive. And at that point, like, okay, we'll continue with it. Did Spanish, and that was my further kind of choice. And then by the following couple years, graduated in basically a Bachelor of Arts in Spanish with a minor of English, because at that time there wasn't really like a ESL program. There was one for more like teaching in K through 12 settings, but I knew I didn't want to teach in K through 12 just because of personal preference. I preferred more like the international side. So I kind of tried to take courses that were relevant. Did some kind of volunteering that helped me kind of determine, is this the career for me? Which was great too, because the one class I had for global studies, the requirement was to volunteer in your community. And I volunteered for, it's a long name, Lutheran Social Services Refugee Immigration Center.
Okay.
Where you basically teach English to incoming refugees, immigrants, or anyone that might be new to the country. And that opportunity really helped me kind of, you know, yeah, this is what I want to do for a career.
And also you help the students, as you mentioned before, like in the pre-orientation.
Yeah, so I was always involved in international students and studies. I even did a radio show like this, kind of similar for language group, right? There was the International Coffee Night, which I helped kind of get involved in. At some point, I just became more like a co-host by choice. Like I didn't have to, but I wanted to, because it was a great place to meet people, make connections, learn more about other people, where they come from and why they're here. So yeah, I've always been involved in international situations and like communities, and I like that. So that also kind of maybe, yep, I want to do this for my career and continue with it. So.
And that's how you made the transition to
his natural side.
Yeah.
Well, you made a move, correct?
Yeah.
You made a move
Yeah,
to the Midwest after that.
Yep. So like I said, I keep going up and up. I remember like basically after I graduated, I moved to Sioux Falls, which is the largest city in South Dakota. Officially almost 200,000 for population now, according to the recent census. So I kind of was working for my first year after graduation, because college courses, etc. I was still volunteering, and at some point during that time, I knew that I wanted to get my certification for teaching English abroad. There was a class in Minneapolis, so I did that for a brief month, and then when I came back, I got a job at the place I was volunteering as a full-fledged beginning English teacher. Did that for a couple years, and eventually, again, it's one of those decisions you have to make for yourself. I'm like, am I going to stay here, or are there better opportunities somewhere else? Which I did. I found one in Minneapolis, and I ended up moving to Minneapolis, so the next big city.
But
right?
that job, I think, is one of the hardest one, to be a beginner teacher, because you take students from zero, and it is hard for them to understand you. So you have to have a lot of skills to make them understand.
Exactly, because like different schools I
nice.
worked at are either like nonprofit schools or some that are more for profit, universities, private language centers, right? I think we talked about that difference too. And it is true, like when you work in some cities or some schools that are more nonprofit, some students you get are, you know, legitimate false beginners. They have no experience in the language, never had exposure possibly, or they might be an initial beginner where, yeah, they may listen to English somewhere here, but never a formal study. Or I'd have people, I specifically work with adults back in Sioux Falls for
Harder,
LSS.
my friend, harder.
These are people who never even learned how to write in their own language.
Yep.
So I'd have people from like Nepal, who, I mean, of course, their background, never learned literacy in their own language. So you have to take that into consideration when you're trying to teach this person new language, a new cultural setting, a new environment, adjusting to USA, you know, all those fun stuff. So it can be difficult.
And pride, because it is hard for an adult to feel that really doesn't control anything and that don't know anything. And it is a hard job to be the first one. I think I will think about it if they offer me like just to teach beginners, because it is really hard.
Well, then I moved to Minneapolis. I was working for another nonprofit school, right? And my new school setting was basically more grassroots. I was teaching classes, I think 4 days a week at this retirement home of, you know, former students that were from abroad, right? So I had a class of Russian-speaking grandmas and some Ethiopians, because in that area of technically like St. Paul, because the Twin Cities, right? When I first entered the class, I was kind of like surprised and like, oh, these are all, mature students who come from different backgrounds. Each has different kind of level of English, because even when people tell me like, oh, I'm B1, B2, whatever, no one truly is that level. Or like when, as a teacher, right, I teach a class of this level, people in that level are up in between, etc. It's not one level across. So the first day, just getting to know people and like, oh, we're from Belarus, we're from Russia, Ukraine, right? From Ethiopia, et cetera. So then getting used to the new students, what they need to learn, what do I need to teach them? Because when you work for a nonprofit, typically there are certain rules, policies you have to do and teach, especially if grants are involved. So even though I'm teaching a group of mature students who are retired, I still have to incorporate like job skills, which is a requirement from Minnesota for adult ESL learners, or do like occasional testing, like the testing I did in high school for them, which they loved. Joke. But,
what are the different? Because I'm not sure that I know. What are the different levels of learning a language?
So I mean, level wise, it really determines or depends on kind of some factors of like what scale we're using. So I mean, think of the components when you learn a language. You have listening, reading, writing, speaking. Grammar is considered a fifth. Most people say 4, but there's 5. Those are some aspects you look into for a level. So depending on what kind of test procedure we're doing or what system we're using, that can correlate to a certain level, depending on how they do on a placement, test, etc. So in Minnesota, I believe it's called CASA's testing.
But the levels go from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, so you can go from like your beginner to like advanced or proficient.
Well, the beginner would be what?
Beginner is like, I mean, I know in CEFR is A0, A1 would be elementary, right? But yeah, it gets complex, and that's where it's harder because when you move
different standards, right? Different states.
I think if I remember in Minnesota, it's like, well, technically it's like an A1, or they consider it just as beginner, right? So,
but beginner's 0 is like you learn the numbers and the
you
day
know
of
some
the week.
very, very basic
but
things.
A1, you can construct a sentence. You know more things, and just start from that.
Yeah,
we used to. I mean, right now I explain our students that because sometimes they feel like they know more than the level they are, but the idea to have them in a specific level is that all their skills have to be like in the same level.
Yeah.
And sometimes they speak very well, but they really don't know the grammar, or they are lacking some listening skills, but they speak very well and they believe that they are ready and they know English. And that's the idea, to have them all in the same level, but with all their skills. Yeah,
it's true. And then that's like you mentioned too, you'll have some people that have maybe higher speaking skills, lower literacy, or the inverse. They have more literacy, less speaking.
Or usually writing. They are better in writing and reading.
Yeah.
But when they are going to express themselves, it's like,
yeah. So as a teacher, I always have to learn how to address all those, or like know your learners, right? What are their strengths? What are there some things they need to improve upon or need help with? Even though you teach one level, you have multi-levels within that level, and have to address and try to be able to teach everyone, or even like, can they work together on these activities, these projects? So that's definitely a teacher skill.
It's a challenge for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Like you, Shaudy, my original language, my native language is Spanish. I was born here in Chicago, but I grew up in Guatemala City, and I learned because we moved when I was 1 year old, so I learned Spanish as my first language. I was only in Guatemala City up to 3rd grade. So in terms of the Spanish language, in terms of grammar, obviously I only learned up into 3rd grade. And while I'm sure like you, Shaudy, we had English classes. Well, I went to a Catholic school and I had English classes. I mean, it was very basic stuff.
Yeah.
Very basic.
So when I moved back when I was 10 years old. I mean, even though what's your name, that type of stuff, but it's just not conversational. I was not at a conversational level. So I came to the States. I was placed into, I want to say, 5th grade. But I couldn't be in a classroom because I didn't understand. So then I was sent to a supposedly bilingual class.
Yeah.
Where, I mean, they were going over math and science and all this stuff. But, all that stuff I was well advanced in.
You were
with the exception of English.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, how do I catch up?
Yeah.
Obviously, eventually once you get into, I think I don't know if it was high school, I took a Spanish class, but more so for the grammar and writing as opposed to learning, because as opposed to, a child who's going to learn and pick up quicker, as an adult, I'm sure it's a little bit, and you can tell me your experience, how difficult it is to pick it up or not to pick it up, to learn the language.
No, but yeah, definitely.
I recall
the same. I was studying English back home before I came, and I was in intermediate level.
Yeah.
And no. When I arrived here, I knew how to write sentences, but not a paragraph.
It's different. Yeah.
Not a paragraph at all.
Yeah.
It was super challenging because I thought I was, and if you say intermediate level, I mean, English. But no, I was totally lost. I start lower intermediate, like B1, but no.
Well, even like volunteering, like back in my university town, because that was those, side projects you do, the volunteering as you study. Like some schools I went to, very similar to UGO. It's like, okay, I am assigned to this school, this middle school. I'm helping a student from Mexico kind of adjust. Mm-hmm. Very similar. They place them into like these special, not special classes, but like this is a language class to improve. And this one child I was working with, he was from Mexico, and like he understands the material. He just can't do it in English. Mm-hmm. And like the teacher's like, hey, we try to talk to the parents, but they don't speak English. So you have to be that middle person and translate what are parent-teacher conferences, what do the grades mean. Usually the parents, the most important question is like, how is my child doing? Of course, parents, right? Mm-hmm. Like, hey, he's doing well. He understands material. We just need to practice writing in English, and that's it. So it gave me more insight because like I don't have that similar background. Like if you ask me about learning grammar, the only time I recall learning English grammar was like maybe 8th grade. And we had to use like these old textbooks from like the 80s and like do a lot of the underlining sentences, parsing, which is very not the most up-to-date method. And that's the only time I recall actually studying grammar in English, despite that I grew up in USA and such. But
I feel that because, well, I grew up in Venezuela, so I know. And also I study journalism and so I know grammar, but here I heard Spanish. I listening to Spanish speakers that were born here, and they are lacking grammar skills. Yeah. But they speak Spanish or some pronunciation and things like that. Yeah. So you that study Spanish also.
For a good majority of my life, maybe, right?
We are here, and we are 3 Spanish speakers, I guess.
I'd say like how long? So I did 2 years of Spanish in high school, which at that time, like it was very basic Spanish. I don't think it's even level specific. I wanted to take it just because I wanted to learn the language for once because I had the opportunity. Afterwards, like fast forward like back to when I was in university and then took Spanish again. Like, well, I can remember these concepts, the very basic stuff. Grammar wasn't the best because prior we didn't really learn grammar. We just read books that were for children, right?
But in elementary school or high school, do you think it's still basic Spanish? Like we learn basic English in our countries, but do you learn here basic Spanish?
It's very basic. Like I remember in high school when we start learning about verb and conjugations, which at first I never heard of before. It's like, what's a conjugation? And then of course we do it. But in high school, I specifically remember, okay, we're going to do your basics, but we're not going to learn about vosotros because we don't use it here. And like, well, okay. Which looking back didn't really help because later when I did a study abroad in Spain where they use vosotros a lot, luckily, like when I went to university, my wonderful teachers, shout out to them at Modern Language Department, re-taught me things that I didn't know, or like helped kind of, this is the actual Spanish you need to know, not just your specific grammatical Spanish.
But it's in the university level where you think Spanish become like more formal.
Yeah. So I remember in university we learned more like, okay, it's, you have your general Spanish, but then again, I remember the advice I was given, like once you learn enough to feel confident, you kind of need to pick a region, right? Are you going to study more Spanish in Spain? Are you going to study more like Spanish in Mexico, Argentina, right? And my one professor gave me that advice, like pick a region and stick to it, because if you decide to learn all the regions, it's going to be very difficult, which is true. So that's why eventually when I did my study abroad in Spain, the bulk of it that I had the real practice with is, Spain Spanish, which is hard to like determine what that is, right? So, but yeah, I would say like looking back from high school, people who study Spanish today, especially all my friends who do like Spanish immersion school back in Sioux Falls, I think they learn more general Spanish that can be used for all Spanish speakers, because once you start to advance, again, you have to kind of choose where do you want to focus on.
Right.
So, which like in my mind, we don't think of that in English, that for like, do you know American English or do you know British English, when there's a whole global English concept, or there's more people who speak English as a second or third language than native speakers. So,
yeah.
Got it.
So then how did you make your transition from Minnesota to Chicago?
Moving up and up, right? So at that point, I think after about a year or so in Minneapolis, there was an opportunity to teach English at Kaplan here in Chicago. So I was like, wow, this is a really like Kaplan was a big school, et cetera. So I did that, applied, got the job in 2018 when I first moved to Chicago. And then, I went from teaching more from the nonprofit to more for like a private language center, which gave you more of the international perspective, because by then teaching English at Kaplan, these are students that are, of course, more knowledgeable. They're recent graduates from like bachelor's or master's, or they're just tourists, right? So give you more of a different perspective on the international side. Or like when I was in university, the students I'm talking to now are just like the people I had back in my university. The only difference is now I'm the teacher or administration, basically. So
how'd you find your way to MCC?
Just moving on up and up, right? There was a unique position available, and I decided I'm going to take it because I got the experience and skills. And, even though I started as a teacher at Kaplan in 2018, at some point I kind of transitioned to more administration, which I kind of liked a little bit more, because on the admin side of things, you're more involved with students, not just the students in your classroom, right? And even though I was doing admin at Kaplan, I was still able to teach here and there, or like get to know people and make those connections even when people finished.
Yep.
So when I saw this position at MCC, I was kind of like, you know what, it's a great opportunity. It gives me more side to help people who are applying from abroad, right? People who are transferring, doing change of status, right? And I have experience in that since I did admissions prior at Kaplan as well. So that's kind of why I came here. And also, like, I've known of Midwestern for a while. So moving on up.
Awesome.
Yeah, we talked about, well, obviously I learned English at a different age. I was younger, Shaudy, a little bit older. We've talked a little bit about that, that there's really no age to learn. Right?
Oh, yeah.
And I'm sure aside from the diversity that we have here, we have age diversity as well. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So people always ask me like, okay, you teach adults, but like what ages do you teach, or what's the youngest? What's the oldest, right? The youngest, I'd probably say, like, I know at one point we had like 15-year-old or like 14-year-olds, or again, I was doing volunteer work in elementary schools, middle schools. These are people who are like 8. My favorite is the one student I had back in like Minneapolis, St. Paul. She was Russian. She was like 104.
Wow.
Learning English. And, I still tell this story because when people say, I'm too old to learn language. Well, I had a student who was 104.
I can't believe that.
I checked. At first I was kind of like, maybe it's a different ID or verification. I checked. It's 104. And then, she was very unique. Despite that she had a hearing aid, she can still participate. She learned. So having that mindset kind of changed my perspective. Like, you're not that old, or you can learn at any age. It's no excuse. It's your own excuse. And yeah, she started probably learning at 90.
Where she was from?
Russia.
Wow.
So at 90, she became a published author. She wrote some articles for like a Russian magazine, I think. And then she just learned English because that was the opportunity. So yeah, she participated despite age being a factor, health, etc. I mean, she can hear with the hearing aid, and like she would still come to class. So that kind of made me more inspired. Like, you know what? I can do this. You can do this. Or anytime a student tells me, I can't, I'm too old. No, you're not. Try it. Put the effort into it. Or like think of reasons of why you don't want to do it.
Right.
Right. Or how to teach yourself better. So.
I'm speechless. I mean, as soon as we finish, I'm going to start writing my book. Definitely.
Oh, yeah. Do it.
I mean, students, listening. You have to come to classes. I mean, no excuses. Learn English. Learn any language. Do you think learning a new language is definitely a plus? But how make you, as a person, I don't know, like that open mind is... I don't know, learning a new language, open your mind in different ways.
Yeah, I talked to a friend about this, and we were talking about like our experiences, because we both did something similar when languages, and her background is more in French. It's more like, okay, learning a new language is like opening a new door to yourself, and think of your personality. Like, how are you when you speak Spanish? How are you when you speak English? How do you act when you speak French, right? So it definitely does open doors. And does open your perspective and kind of can change you in a way, right? Because I remember even when I came back from studying in Spain, my mom's like, you sound different. Like, well, okay, I just came back from a different country where the language is not technically English as a native language. So, of course, I'm adjusting, right?
Right.
But yeah, it does change your perspective. Even friends I talk to are people who maybe know me before. I'm like, oh, you talk different, but not in a bad way. More like, okay, you talk in a way that's more easy to understand, like you'll have been teaching for the last quite a few years. So yeah, definitely. And as well, like, how do you incorporate that, right? A lot of students would ask, like, how can I learn listening? How can I learn this? What are some things you do every day? Like when you go home, what's the first thing you do? I watch Netflix. Okay. How about you watch something in Netflix language? In English or whatever language you're learning?
Subtitles.
Yeah. I mean, my favorite is like the Friends method, where I think this Korean band on the Ellen show are saying like, we learned English through Friends.
My sister did that.
Yeah, I've got friends who've done this.
With extra classes. But
I have a friend who learned all his English from basically TV shows, and like the way you could do it is very similar. Watch the whole series, English, or maybe in your language with subtitles. Watch it again, put English subtitles. Watch it a third time in English, no subtitles. And you could learn. I've tried it myself. But it's hard because sometimes I watch shows where I know the actor's voice and I hear a different voice. It's hard.
It shocks you. Like
Now, both of you, obviously, Shaudy, you participated in part of your ESL program here at MCC. Now you're the manager for the admissions. What are some of the highlights about our programs, or what differentiates our program versus others?
Well, I will say, like, coming from other schools I've worked at, there's more flexibility, right? That's a plus. The classes you take here are definitely useful depending on what your goal is. Because like we mentioned, some classes are level based, right? But a typical thing at most schools is like, what happens after you finish levels, right? Where do I go next? So at MCC, you have options for that. If they complete the levels, they can do professional English and academic English, which is great for like university prep. Or if they really want to, they can transition towards associate programs, which are great because that's usually what most of my students in the past would do, is they would apply to university, a master's program. But depending how that goes, like, and admissions itself, but at MCC, you have the options for the business programs. You've got accounting. There's even health programs. So to me, and to all the schools I worked in the past, like, there's more opportunities for international students than just, okay, English is done, move on. You actually can stay at MCC and continue with something, which is great.
Right. Usually our students already had a career in their countries. their bachelors are from their country, or they already has a master, but our associates complement all of that. And it's a way to don't stop or get stuck like, okay, I learned English, but now what, as you are saying. So it is, MCC has a good options.
Yeah, I've had students who, in Chicago go from one English school to the other, and like, that's great, but at some point you kind of have to do something more productive and worth your time and value, because you're learning English for the 6th time at this school. It's great, but maybe if you want to do something like marketing, right? That's a great option to get that associate. It's an entry-level requirement. You could potentially either look for a job or possibly do an internship. Or at MCC, there's also the options for CPT, OPT, right? Which is great as well, because you can get work experience as a student. So it builds towards like a future path, which is great.
Also, like when you feel like you learn English, we never stop learning a language. Yeah. This is definitely that. I can speak by myself, because I got at some point like, I don't want to write an essay anymore or do the same like we do in ESL programs. So when MCC opened the business programs, I immediately I switched to that program. So I still continue learning English, but I feel that I was advancing. It was a different level. Yeah. But we never stop learning the language. Yeah. I'm still making mistakes, and mistakes are right.
Same. Like, everyone, that's my favorite. Like when you learn a language, my favorite thing is always like, okay, even though you make mistakes, you learn that way, right? Because even in my background, I've made many mistakes in Spanish, but like those are funny mistakes to me, because again, like it's a language difference, right? And that helps you learn, or at least you remember that better than trying to memorize 2,000 words. That's to each their own, but to me, it's just easier to learn by actually doing it versus just like studying over and over these vocabs that you might not use. Or if you work for a business situation or a degree of some sort, you're using the English skills or language skills you have in an actual real life situation, which is more that practical use. So
it's okay. Yeah. Sometimes I correct myself, sometimes no, but this is my English, and it's okay.
It is. I think the most important thing is to be able to do it. Go out, enroll wherever it is. Yeah. Just start. No fear. Once you get started, you find yourself and you get the confidence to be able to do something. We're wrapping up. Anything else you have in mind?
It's the Q&A portion.
Yeah, we have quick questions here. No, we don't have. It is awesome. It is awesome to have you here.
Yeah, welcome. Where do you see the program going, the ESL program going?
Well, I know that we're looking at more abroad applicants, and we are getting more people from abroad applying, which is great because, again, there's opportunities that people have and maybe they didn't know of, or like, again, people looking to have the opportunity to study abroad, maybe advance their career, or at least get more of insight of what they can do when they're here. That's a great option. So that's great for me because, again, some of these countries, like, for example, Colombia, of course, which most of my friends are Colombian that side. There's opportunities, and that's a great way to kind of start.
What are the countries that represent our students here?
I'd say now definitely Colombia, Brazil, Mongolia, which to me is unique because every school I worked at, there's always this unique group of students which you didn't expect, but then you see some Mongolians. I'm getting to know more and more. I've seen more for Turkmenistan, right?
Yes, my people. I love Turkmenistan.
Exactly. Like I haven't really had like very, I would say countries that are not common until now. I'm like, wow, I'm getting more applicants from Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan. Of course, my Colombians, Venezuelans as well. Right. So
I haven't met some Venezuelans here. Yeah.
It's my favorite. You can try to like listen to like Venezuelan Spanish. I'm like,
We thought that we didn't have any accent.
Everyone has one. So like everyone has their own accent of some sort.
Like singing.
Yeah. if you ever watch like the fun videos for English, I just watched one maybe a couple of days ago. It was a person who is from Wisconsin versus Minnesota. It's like your typical Midwestern states. There are some features that are different, or like vowels are differently pronounced, or might be some variance here and there. Even like me, when someone asked me or told me like, you have an accent back at university, and it's like, what do you mean? Say your state. South Dakota. I'm like, oh.
Right.
Then you can hear it gets the O, right? So
I don't know. I can get that.
yeah, it's. I mean, you can kind of pick it up here and there, but if I were to go to like maybe West coastal states or like New York, etc., they might pick up like Midwestern. But in my defense, I think Midwestern English accents are kind of easier to understand. They're neutral. We don't have any kind of like difficult to understand features. But maybe old school Chicago.
Probably U.S. accents are easier than say, Irish.
Yeah.
Accents.
Or like I remember one
or
class
Scottish
I taught,
accents. Those are extremely difficult.
I had students try to like pretend. Okay, you want to pretend you are a real New Yorker. I want to hear your best impression of someone from New York. And they would, I would play a video to kind of help them. Kind of. I mean, like coffee, like those things, right? We'd watch a video first and they kind of practice.
Okay.
I had in college, there was a classmate that was from England. I can't remember, which part of England, but there were times that I could not understand what he was saying. Yeah. It was just like say that again, please.
Yeah, I've had coworkers too that on the the UK side of things, and one guy came over to visit for like a work event. There were a few times I was kind of like, what? What did you ask me for? Because again, the expressions are different.
Yeah.
And fun fact is usually vowels are different among English. So like rather they speak some sort of British variety, North American variety, it's the vowels that are primarily going to be different. If it's not vowels, it's probably going to be like maybe some phrases, verbs, nouns, just like in Spanish too. So
I run the conversation club here at MCC just to also challenge myself. But we discussed this week that one of our students, she said that she couldn't understand the teacher. And I told her, don't worry, you will get used to. Because of her, she said, because of her accent. And I said, don't worry. We have an advantage that nobody has. We know how to understand English from international people. It's like we recognize the words that coming from an Asian, from a person from, I don't know, Turkmenistan. This is unique. Yep. I always put the example of my sister because she learning English. She is also a English teacher, but she is also always around Americans. Yep. When an international student or something are close to me and talk to me, she always asks me like, I didn't get anything.
Yeah.
Just a few words. I said, I understood everything because I think this is an advantage.
Yeah. Similar to me, like after teaching a while, like you kind of learn how to understand, even if that person doesn't feel confident. My favorite are the people like, sorry for my English. Like you spoke fine.
I understood
everything.
Yeah.
You do not need to apologize. Or people who are just too nervous and instead will show you the phone screen and like Google Translate. You're like, hey, it's okay. I mean, I've taught for 20 years. I can kind of understand what you're saying, or I'm used to it. Correct. So
I think a lot of it is just fear. I think fear of not sounding correctly or fear of making whatever. Errors. You just got to get over that fear. Yeah. So I think it's been I really enjoyed the conversation. I think it's been a wonderful conversation, talking a little bit about everything, mainly Spanish and ESL. English
until the next one.
Until the next one. Yeah, we should do another one.
Panel discussion.
Why not? Yes.
So I want to thank both the co-hosts, Shaudy, for being here, and Ryan, our ESL admissions manager. I think it's a great conversation. Hopefully you gave some good insights into what it is to come to Chicago, the Midwestern Career College, to learn a language, and many other things. So I want to remind the listeners to follow us at Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and write to us at podcast@mcccollege.edu. And we look forward to talking to you next time. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yay. High five.